Welcome back, brothers and sisters. Last we left off, I had given you 4 ideas for some berries your characters could harvest in the Feywild, or really anywhere in your RPG worlds. And today, I want to give you 4 ideas on how you can use Blight to make your dungeons even deadlier. And I'm going to just mention here at the beginning, I made this asset, this VTT terrain asset for some Blight, just by taking a couple random PNGs of some Blight and putting them behind this cracked open infant skull. Pretty neat, huh? My idea was this Blight was grown from a hag who buried the corpses of the children they abducted and either ate or sacrificed or whatever evil thing they did with them, right? Buried them out in the woods, and the Blight grew up out of their skulls, which sort of acted like the seed for the Blight. Pretty dark, pretty perfect for some D&D, if you ask me. So, let's jump into it. Don't forget, pay your hobby tithing, leave a like, and let us pray. Idea number 1 for a deadlier dungeon with some Blight is the rampant Blight fills the dungeon's halls, slowing or preventing movement through the passageways, making them excellent spots for monsters to ambush or corner the hero. So you can see in this little mock-up dungeon scene I put together, there is Blight crowding the stairways, and both of the exits out of this room where some horned demon thing has ambushed are for adventurers. So is escape possible? Of course, if I were running this encounter and I had this Blight here, I would say characters could certainly try and crawl or force their way through, but it's going to require a pretty tough athletics check or a strength saving throw or dex saving throw. And if you fail, not only are you going to be grappled and restrained by the Blight, but it's going to start sucking your life out of you. It's going to start dealing necrotic damage. So you could try that, but your best bet might be to have some of your tank characters, right, hold that demon back while your wizard or your druid or whatever can use some magics to clear out one of these hallways. And I like that it's a way to block an exit without just having a closed door, right? Because in this way, they can see the exit. They can sort of see through the Blight where they need to go, but they just can't get there. And there's going to be so much tension involved in trying to get through that, as opposed to just a closed door, which is okay, well, there's something on the other side of that. Hopefully it's escape. Where's the lever to pull to open this? You have to do some creative problem solving here, especially when you've got monsters rushing in behind you. And just a little thought I had right now was, it would also be cool as if characters are trying to climb their way through here, they start encountering the skeletal remains of other adventurers who tried the same thing. And maybe those things can animate, and that's what attacks the characters if they get trapped in the Blight. But that's idea number 1, that it overgrows the halls. Idea number 2, maybe your rampant Blight has compromised the integrity of the walls, floors, and ceilings, risking collapse at the slightest disturbance. It can isolate characters on different levels, it can spill swarms of Blight into the rooms, or even crush the party under heaps of rubble. So, is a dungeon collapsing the most unique idea in the world? Maybe not, but having some Blight do it proposes interesting little story aspects or story elements you can work into it. What if the Blight has a sort of a mind of its own, which is actually kind of dipping into an idea I'll share next, but when the characters enter rooms or the deeper they delve into the dungeon, the Blight can start to constrict and get tighter, and dust can start to fall from the ceiling where it's kind of breaking up the rock, as if the Blight doesn't want the characters here. If they're delving into a Fey dungeon, then it would make sense that nature is trying to drive out these heroes, this corrupted evil nature, right? And so maybe this is where you can introduce some timer mechanics. Anytime the party enters a room, like in this case, right, there's Blight just growing all over the walls. There's some columns that I have Blight kind of placed over so it's constricted and wrapped up through the support beams. That's when you roll your D4. And you say, hey, yeah, you maybe at the beginning of your introduction to this room, there's some sort of altar or a shrine or a treasure chest or whatever in the center of the room, but you roll your D4, and guys, in about 2 rounds, this Blight is going to constrict so tightly that it's going to break these columns, and then the ceiling's going to collapse, and that's not very fun if it's just, you're all going to die. Although there is a time and place for that, but you don't always have to do that. Some of those other ideas I shared here are ways you could have there be consequences for Blight breaking apart your dungeon without just being a rock falls and kills you all. For example, right, going back to it, we said it could maybe break open the floor, and now 2 of the characters who fail their dex saves fall down 20 feet, 30 feet, taking quite a bit of damage from the fall, and also find themselves down in a crypt filled with a bunch of skeletons. They can just still see a little bit of that torchlight from the characters looking down like, are you all right? Yeah, I think so. And then the stone lids of the sarcophagi begin to slide open as the dead have been disturbed, right? Now you've got to fight way down below that the characters either have to get up and out of to escape it, or the rest of the party has to come down and help them. And at the same time, you could have more Blight down in the crypt that then is starting up a new timer, and you can just keep applying the pressure that way. So I think dumping characters into areas is a lot of fun. Or when the Blight breaks open a section of wall, there's not really a risk of getting crushed or killed, but it's just opening up wounds in the earth where Blight or shambling mounds or zombies that have been buried under whatever kind of monster you want to show up. Maybe it opens up a section of wall to another room where like a demon was being held. The Fae had trapped some sort of demon or I don't even know what kind of monster down in here, and now it comes bursting out of the room, and the characters have just a sudden fight on their hands they weren't really ready for. That could be interesting. In that last one, where it could just crush parties members under heaps of rubble, that could be a fun way to like, you know, if the tank character is the one who gets the brunt of the blow and they're trapped under this rubble at the start of the fight and they have to make some checks to escape and dig their way out before they take bludgeoning damage and start to get crushed to death or they suffocate, the rest of the party has a decision to make where if things also got spilled in with it, if monsters got spilled in with this collapse, it's like, do we fight these things and hope that our barbarian or the cleric, or I mean any character who gets trapped, it's going to be a problem for the party, right? But like, do we take time to try and pull them out? Do we just fight these enemies? Like, you're again forcing tough decisions for the party, and that's what I think is so cool about this idea, that it's making the dungeon full of brittle brick. Idea number 3, the rampant Blight has a cruel mind of its own and uses its roots to pull levers, open doors to monster-filled chambers, or activate traps to harm the party. I said earlier, like, ooh, maybe the Blight has a mind of its own. This is the idea where that really comes into play. So in this mock-up encounter I've got here, the rogue, little Zildjian, has kind of crept across the room to some sort of altar or a lever or some sort of point of interest in this dungeon, right? And there is Blight kind of growing out of the walls or up through the floors around it. And in this scenario, it has done something. It's pulled a lever, it's disturbed the ruins, and it has caused a bunch of spikes to come out of the wall. And now Zildjian's like, I gotta make a dex save as they try and run back to join the rest of the party before the Blight gets them spiked through. Just one example of how I could see this idea kind of coming into play. If I were to use this as a GM, how would I do it? I would roll the Blight into initiative, and I wouldn't tell my characters or the players that the Blight was in the initiative yet, at least until the very first time they discover this Blight is moving on its own, right? But the party enters into this room. I say, all right, everybody roll your initiative. I roll it for the Blight, and then Zildjian maybe takes his first turn to creep across the room. He's like, I'm just going to investigate this shrine. I want a better sense of maybe what kind of treasure it might hold, or how do I get this thing safely off to Indiana Jones style, right? Do I have to swap something out? And then they take their turn seeing like, oh, there's nothing in here. I got nothing to worry about, right? And then the Blight's turn in initiative, I described the tendrils of the roots begin to wrap around the idol and then lifts it up and triggers the trap. Or if you're in a room that has a trap door, maybe one of the characters is investigating the trap door and the other characters watch in horror as on the Blight's initiative, the roots kind of curl down from the ceiling, wrap around the trapdoor lever and yank it and cause a character to fall down into it. There's endless ways you can make this work where your Blight is taking turns, not as in an attack against the characters, but instead manipulating the environment of the dungeon. And what makes this different than just, oh, the Blight is going to break a column and cause things to fall down, right? That's sort of like the Blight has a mind of its own. This is meant to demonstrate a sort of wicked intelligence, something that Blights shouldn't possess. Like, how does this Blight seem to understand how this dungeon works? How does it know how to trigger these traps and put us in these terrible spots? Like, you're giving your dungeon a mind, a brain, all through this Blight that has grown through it. I think that would be so cool. And then your players are kind of realizing, like, are we fighting the monsters in this dungeon, or are we fighting the dungeon? And the final idea I wanted to share with you all today was maybe the rampant Blight causes weak flesh to rapidly deteriorate, putting dying creatures at far greater risk of death. So saving throws might be a disadvantage, or healing magics may not work in rooms filled with the Blight. So another little sample dungeon encounter I put together, right? The party was investigating some sort of alchemical chamber, maybe here to get some potions or something. There's some Blight that they saw growing in the corners of the rooms when that horned demon that they've been trying to flee from is let into the room, or it arrives here. Maybe calling back to the previous idea, the Blight opened the door, it pulled the lever to raise the gate that the characters had sealed just in time, and the demon kind of slammed up against it. Now, like, oh, we got time, let's investigate this thing. Oh, Blight pulls that lever, lifts the portcullis. You've got a fight on your hands. So they're in this fight, and the alchemist Peter goes down. This thing clubs him in the head, and down he goes. Now the characters have a very, very deadly situation in their hands where they can see all of the spores in the room kind of falling off of this Blight suddenly begin to move over towards Peter, who is like coughing on them, suffocating in his unconscious dying state. They can see he's in a lot of pain, and maybe his skin, wherever the Blight kind of settles on it, starts to turn gray and rapidly deteriorate and decompose. So again, saving throws might be made at disadvantage, which that's like, if I were a player and I was told I'm rolling a disadvantage, I'd be terrified, because right, you roll a nat 1, which you got a 5% chance of doing that on any d20 roll. Now you're rolling that twice, like pretty good odds you're gonna have a nat 1 come up on one of those rolls. That's gonna give you 2 automatic failures on your death saving throw. But also, like, if you were to take damage and then you're having to make these saves, right, like, just, you are in a very dangerous situation. And I don't know if there's much the party can necessarily do about that. Like, unless they prioritize killing all of the Blight before they kill the monster they're fighting, they kind of just have to hope that they can get this person up or stabilize them. And then with the second part of the idea I had here is maybe the Blight is so severe, it is so effective at pulling life out of whatever thing is dying around it, that healing magics don't even work. As long as there are Blights in the room, and if you know, maybe you can just burn them away with a torch. It doesn't take anything crazy. But as long as there is Blight in this room, if you attempt to do cure wounds, if you attempt to drink a potion of healing, any of that, it just doesn't work. Now, don't be an asshole and have your players waste the spell slot or waste the potion. Describe it as like you try and conjure this spell, you try and call upon your god, but every time the light begins to form in your hand, it just turns gray and turns to ash, right? And you don't lose the spell slot, but the spell's not working for some reason. Or the healing potion, you go to drink it and it just turns to dust on your lips, like the blighted leaves kind of falling from the ceiling where the ivies are dying, right? You just give them these hints. Describe how this is not working in a fun way, not just like, oh, so okay, it doesn't work, sorry, all right, we guys have to figure it out. That would suck. That would not be fun. And one other idea I just wanted to tack on here at the end with this is, you've got this Blight that is pulling life from whatever is dying around it, right? What if it also had the ability to put that life into something that's already died and raise it from the ground? So if your monster is killed and there is Blight in the room, it on its initiative, or maybe direct, as soon as that monster dies, it can scuttle over with a reaction, burrow into the flesh, and bring it back to life. Give it a Dark Souls second phase. Thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video, brothers and sisters. If you got some inspiration or some value out of this, don't forget to leave a like, and you also might consider indoctrinating yourself into this RPG cult of doom by checking out my Patreon, where every Sunday I am releasing the Sunday Homebrew, which is a bundle of whatever I have prepped for my own campaigns that week. So the most recent one, Sunday Homebrew number 9, was a set of Fae-themed VTT terrain, which included the Blight asset that I was using in this video, but it also had things like a cool Fae Satyr basket full of pearls, and you could use that in place of a treasure chest for a Fae dungeon. This cool cauldron that I added some goat hoofs onto. You can't really tell what this one is because it's so small right now, but it's this like twisted, gnarled branch with some goat horns coming off the side and this floating set of candles. There's a bunch of others that you can use to make some dungeons. Speaking of which, as part of that same bundle, there are 4 pre-populated dungeon maps using all of the terrain. There are some PDF printouts for you to prep your notes for whatever system you're running. It's not like designed specifically for 5e or anything in particular, but you get all that for $3 a month, and I release something every Sunday. Additionally, if you're like, I'm not really interested in paying for a Patreon or whatever, you can follow the Patreon for free, where as close to every weekday as I can, I am releasing the Morning Ritual, which is just a little hobby blog. It's always going to start with either a D4 or longer list of the ways that I enjoyed the RPG hobby the previous day. That'll include things like what I'm crafting or kit bashing or painting, what I've been prepping. It'll also include links to some interesting articles or videos I might have watched or listened to from other RPG creators. So just lots of cool ways to keep you immersed in the hobby. And I also will release, as part of the Morning Ritual, D6, D8, whatever long lists of ideas for whatever I might need for my campaigns. And the list that I started talking about today of ideas of how to use Blight to make a deadly dungeon, that was in the Morning Ritual number 3. And it was actually, I think, a D6 list. So you can go follow that for free and get an extra 2 bonus ideas. So That's enough plugging from me today. Thank you all again for watching, and we say these things in their unholy names. Amen.